Miletus, Latin, Miletus, Turkish, Milet, was an ancient Greek city on the western coast of Anatolia, near the mouth of the Meander River in ancient Caria. Its ruins are located near the modern village of Balat in Aydın Province, Turkey. Before the Persian invasion in the middle of the 6th century BC, Miletus was considered the greatest and wealthiest of Greek cities. In other sources, however, it is mentioned that the city was much more modest up until the Peloponnesian War, when the city-state of Samos, for example on the island of Samos opposite Miletus, was considered a larger and more important city and harbour at the time. Miletus' greatest wealth and splendour was reached during the Hellenistic era and later Roman times. Evidence of first settlement at the site has been made inaccessible by the rise of sea level and deposition of sediments from the Meander. The first available evidence is of the Neolithic. In the early and Middle Bronze Age this settlement came under Minoan influence. Legend has it that an influx of Cretans occurred displacing the indigenous Lelagers. The site was renamed Miletus after a place in Crete. The Late Bronze Age, 13th century BC, saw the arrival of Luwian language speakers from south-central Anatolia calling themselves the Carians. Later in that century other Greeks arrived. The city at that time rebelled against the Hittite Empire. After the fall of that empire, the city was destroyed in the 12th century BC and starting about 1000 BC was resettled extensively by the Ionian Greeks. Legend offers an Ionian foundation event sponsored by a founder named Neleus from the Peloponnesus. The Greek Dark Ages were a time of Ionian settlement and consolidation in an alliance called the Ionian League. The archaic period of Greece began with a sudden and brilliant flash of art and philosophy on the coast of Anatolia. In the 6th century BC, Miletus was the site of origin of the Greek philosophical tradition, when Thales, followed by Anaximander and Anaximenes, began to speculate about the material constitution of the world, and to propose speculative naturalistic explanations for various natural phenomena. Miletus is the birthplace of the Hagia Sophia's architect Isidore of Miletus and Thales, a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher in c. 624 BC. Geography. The ruins appear on satellite maps at 37 degrees 31.8 N, 27 degrees 16.7 E, about 3 kilometers north of Balat and 3 kilometers east of Batikoy in Aydın Province, Turkey. In antiquity the city possessed a harbour at the southern entry of a large bay, on which two more of the traditional 12 Ionian cities stood, Priene and Miletus. The harbour of Miletus was additionally protected by the nearby small island of Lade. Over the centuries the gulf silted up with alluvium carried by the Meander River. Priene and Miletus had lost their harbours by the Roman era, and Miletus itself became an inland town in the early Christian era. All three were abandoned to ruin as their economies were strangled by the lack of access to the sea. There is a great harbour monument where, according to the New Testament account, the Apostle Paul stopped on his way back to Jerusalem by boat. He met the Ephesian elders and then headed out to the beach to bid him farewell, recorded in the book of Acts chapter 20 verses 17 to 38. Geology. During the Pleistocene epoch the Miletus region was submerged in the Aegean Sea. It subsequently emerged slowly, the sea reaching a low level of about 130 meters below present level at about 18,000 BP. The site of Miletus was part of the mainland. A gradual rise brought a level of about 1.75 meters below present at about 5,500 BP, creating several karst block islands of limestone. The location of the first settlements at Miletus. At about 1500 BC the karst shifted due to small crustal movements and the islands consolidated into a peninsula. Since then the sea has risen 1.75 meters, but the peninsula has been surrounded by sediment from the Meander River and is now landlocked. Sedimentation of the harbour began at about 1000 BC, and by AD 300 Lake Baffa had been created. History. Neolithic. The earliest available archaeological evidence indicates that the islands on which Miletus was originally placed were inhabited by a Neolithic population in 3500–3000 BC. Pollen in core samples from Lake Baffa in the Latmus region inland of Miletus suggests that a lightly grazed climax forest prevailed in the Meander Valley. Otherwise untenanted, sparse Neolithic settlements were made at springs, numerous and sometimes geothermal in this karst Rift Valley topography. The islands offshore were settled perhaps for their strategic significance at the mouth of the Meander, a route inland protected by escarpments. The graziers in the valley may have belonged to them, but the location looked to the sea. Bronze Age recorded history at Miletus begins with the records of the Hittite Empire and the Mycenaean records of Pylos and Knossos. In the Late Bronze Age, the prehistoric archaeology of the Early and Middle Bronze Age portrays a city heavily influenced by society and events elsewhere in the Aegean, rather than inland. Minoan period beginning at about 1900 BC. Artifacts of the Minoan civilization acquired by trade arrived at Miletus. For some centuries the location received a strong impulse from that civilization, an archaeological fact that tends to support but not necessarily confirm the founding legend, that is, a population influx from Crete. According to Strabo, Ephorus says, Miletus was first founded and fortified above the sea by Cretans, where the Miletus of olden times is now situated, being settled by Sarpedon, who brought colonists from the Cretan Miletus and named the city after that Miletus, the place formerly being in possession of the Leleges. The legends recounted as history by the ancient historians and geographers are perhaps the strongest. The late mythographers have nothing historically significant to relate. Mycenaean period. Miletus was a Mycenaean stronghold in the coast of Asia Minor from California, 1450 to 1100 BC. In c. 1320 BC, the city supported an anti-Hittite rebellion of Uhhaziti of nearby Arzawa. Mursili ordered his generals Malaziti and Gullah to raid Milawanda, and they proceeded to burn parts of it. Damage from LHIIIA found on site has been associated with this raid. In addition, the town was fortified according to a Hittite plan. Miletus is then mentioned in the Tawagalawa letter, part of a series, including the Manalpatahunta letter and the Milewata letter, all of which are less securely dated. The Tawagalawa letter notes that Milewata had a governor, Atpa, who was under the jurisdiction of Ariwa, and that the town of Atria was under Milesian jurisdiction. The Manalpatahunta letter also mentions Atpa. Together the two letters tell that the adventurer Piyamaradu had humiliated Manalpatahunta before Atpa, a Hittite king, then chased Piyamaradu into Milawandaran. In the Tawagalawa letter, requested Piyamaradu's extradition to Hatti. The Milewata letter mentions a joint expedition by the Hittite king and a Luwayan vassal against Miletus, and notes that the city were now under Hittite control. Homer mentions that during the time of the Trojan War, Miletus was an ally of Troy and was city of the Carians, under Nastor and Amphimachus. In the last stage of LHIIIB, the citadel of Bronze Age Pylos counted among its female slaves Emirati Mycenaean Greek for women from Miletus, written in Linear B syllabic script. During the collapse of Bronze Age civilization, Miletus was burnt again, presumably by the Sea Peoples. Dark Age mythographers told that Neleus, a son of Codrus the last king of Athens, had come to Miletus after the return of the Heraclids. The Ionians killed the men of Miletus and married their widows. Archaic period. The city of Miletus became one of the 12 Ionian cities of Asia Minor. Miletus was one of the cities involved in the Lelantine War of the 8th century BC. Ties with Megara. Miletus is known to have early ties with Megara in Greece. According to some scholars, these two cities had built up a colonization alliance. In the 7th-6th century BC they acted in accordance with each other. Both cities acted under the leadership and sanction of an Apollo oracle. Megara cooperated with that of Delphi. Miletus had her own oracle of Apollo Didymius Milesius in Didyma. Also, there are many parallels in the political organization of both cities. According to Pausanias, the Megarians said that their town owed its origin to Car, the son of Pheronius, who built the city citadel called Caria. This Car of Megara may or may not be one and the same as the Car of the Carians, also known as Car. In the late 7th century BC, the tyrant Thrasybulus preserved the independence of Miletus during a 12-year war fought against the Lydian Empire. Thrasybulus was an ally of the famous Corinthian tyrant Periander. Miletus was an important center of philosophy and science, producing such men as Thales, Anaximander and Anaximenes. Referring to this period, religious studies professor F. E. Peters described pandeism as the legacy of the Milesians. By the 6th century BC, Miletus had earned a maritime empire with many colonies, but brushed up against powerful Lydia at home, and the tyrant Polycrates of its neighbor to the west, Samos. When Cyrus of Persia defeated Croesus of Lydia in the middle of the 6th century BC, Miletus fell under Persian rule. In 499 BC, Miletus's tyrant Aristagoras became the leader of the Ionian revolt against the Persians. Persia quashed this rebellion and punished Miletus by selling all of the women and children into slavery, killing the men, and expelling all of the young men as eunuchs, thereby assuring that no Miletus citizen would ever be born again. A year afterward, Phrynichus produced the tragedy, The Capture of Miletus in Athens. The Athenians fined him for reminding them of their loss. Classical period. Its grid-like layout became the basic layout for Roman cities. In 479 BC, the Greeks decisively defeated the Persians on the Greek mainland, and Miletus was freed of Persian rule. During this time several other cities were formed by Milesian settlers, spanning across what is now Turkey and even as far as Crimea. The eponymous founder of the bawdy Milesian school of literature Aristides of Miletus taught there. Hellenistic period. In 334 BC, the city was driven from Persian rule along with most of Anatolia by Alexander the Great. In the Hellenistic period the city reached its greatest extent. Within its walls it occupied an area of approximately 90 hectares. Roman period. The New Testament mentions Miletus as the site where the Apostle Paul in AD 57 met with the elders of the Church of Ephesus near the close of his third missionary journey. As recorded in Acts of the Apostles, it is believed that Paul stopped by the Great Harbour Monument and sat on its steps. He may have met the Ephesian elders there and then bid him farewell on the nearby beach. Miletus is also the city where Paul left Trophimus, one of his traveling companions, to recover from an illness. Because this cannot be the same visit as Acts chapter 20, Paul must have made at least one additional visit to Miletus, perhaps as late as AD 65 or 66. Paul's previous successful 3-year ministry in nearby Ephesus resulted in the evangelization of the entire province of Asia. It is safe to assume that at least by the time of the Apostles' second visit to Miletus, a fledgling Christian community was established in Miletus. Byzantine period. During the Byzantine Age the see of Miletus was raised to an archbishopric and later a metropolitan bishopric. The small Byzantine castle called Palatium, located on the hill beside the city, was built at this time. Miletus was headed by a curator. Turkish rule. Seljuk Turks conquered the city in the 14th century and used Miletus as a port to trade with Venice. Finally, Ottomans utilized the city as a harbor during their rule in Anatolia. As the harbor became silted up, the city was abandoned. Due to ancient and subsequent deforestation, overgrazing, erosion and soil degradation, the ruins of the city lie some 10 kilometers from the sea, with sediments filling the plain and bare hill ridges without soils and trees. A maquis shrubland remaining. The Ilias Bay complex from 1403 with its mosque as an Europa Nostra awarded cultural heritage site in Miletus. Archaeological excavations. The first excavations in Miletus were conducted by the French archaeologist Olivier Rayet in 1873, followed by the German archaeologists Julius Hulsen and Theodor Wiegand between 1899 and 1931. Excavations, however, were interrupted several times by wars and various other events. Karl Weichert excavated for a short season in 1938 and again between 1955 and 1957. He was followed by Gerhard Kleiner and then by Wolfgang Müller-Wiener. Today, excavations are organized by the Ruhr University of Bochum, Germany. One remarkable artifact recovered from the city during the first excavations of the 19th century, the market gate of Miletus, was transported piece by piece to Germany and reassembled. It is currently exhibited at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. The main collection of artifacts resides in the Miletus Museum in Diddum, Aden, serving since 1973. Colonies of Miletus. Miletus became known for the great number of colonies it founded. It was considered the greatest Greek metropolis and founded more colonies than any other Greek city. Pliny the Elder mentions 90 colonies founded by Miletus in his Natural History, among them Amycus, Apollonia, Dioscurias, Histria, Adesis, Olbia, Panticapaeum, Phanagoria, Phasis, Pitiush, Sinope, Tanes, Theodosia, Tomish, Tyras, Trapezant. Notable people: Thales, pre-Socratic philosopher; Anaximander, pre-Socratic philosopher; Cadmus, writer; Anaximenes, pre-Socratic philosopher; Hippodamus, urban planner; Aspasia, courtesan, and mistress of Pericles, was born in Miletus; Aristides, writer; Hecataeus, historian; Hesychius, Greek chronicler and biographer; Isidore, Greek architect; Aristagoras, tyrant of Miletus; Leucippus, philosopher and originator of atomism.